Hey guys, welcome back to more Reddit stories. In this video, a homeowner faced 5 armed robbers with his gun and taught them a lesson. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled $500,000 Malicious Compliance. So I work as a senior compliance officer in a large multinational corporation that operates in highly regulated industries. My job is to ensure that we meet all regulatory requirements across different markets. It's a complex job, but after 15 years in the industry, I have seen it all, or so I thought. So our company recently brought in a new CFO, Julia, who was determined to cut costs across the board. She was a numbers person through and through, and in her mind, compliance was a bloated department that could easily be trimmed down. We had several meetings where she would question every expense, every process, every role. It was clear that she did not understand the intricacies of compliance and did not care to learn. One day, Julia called me into her office and told me that my team was too expensive and that I needed to lay off 30% of my staff. I tried to explain that each person on my team was responsible for managing compliance in different jurisdictions, and cutting staff would put the company at risk of non-compliance, leading to fines or even worse. But Julia was having none of it. "We are overstaffed, make it work or I'll find someone who can," she said. Seeing no other option, I complied. I made the layoffs, reluctantly letting go of some of my most experienced staff. But I knew that this was a ticking time bomb. A few months later, our company was bidding for a massive contract with a government entity worth $500 million. Winning this contract would be a game changer, and the pressure was on to ensure that everything was in order. Julia was leading the charge, but the timelines were tight and we had to submit all compliance documentation within a week. Here is where things got interesting. So, one of the key compliance documents required for the bid involved an obscure regulation in a small market we operated in, let's call it Country X. The regulation was something that only one of the laid-off team members, a guy named Peter, had handled. The documentation needed his specific knowledge and a set of reports that were saved on his company-issued laptop, which had been returned and promptly wiped after his departure. Julia, not understanding the gravity of the situation, assumed that this was a minor hiccup and ordered me to just find the reports or recreate them. But the process was not that simple. The reports were generated through a custom-built tool that Peter had developed over years, and there was no way to replicate them without his expertise. I calmly explained this to Julia, who then realized the severity of the situation. Desperate, Julia asked me to contact Peter and see if he could help us out as a consultant. Well, I reached out to Peter, who was understandably bitter about his sudden layoff, but willing to listen for the right price. I reported back to Julia that Peter was willing to assist, but he was asking for a 6-figure consulting fee. Julia balked at the cost but realized she had no choice. Peter was the only person who could get us the documents we needed to comply with the regulations in Country X. Peter returned, and within 2 days he produced the necessary reports. However, when Julia submitted the bid, it was too late. The delays caused by the scramble had already set us back, and the contract went to a competitor who had everything in order on time. The fallout was significant. The company lost out on a $500,000 deal, and the board of directors was furious. Julia's cost-cutting measures, which had seemed so effective on paper, had directly led to this catastrophic loss. The kicker though, Peter's consulting fee and the costs of cleaning up the compliance mess afterwards were more than double the savings Julia had achieved by laying off my team. And as for me, the board decided that compliance was too important to be left to the whims of someone who didn't understand it. Julia was quietly let go, and I was promoted to a new role, head of global risk management, with a mandate to ensure that nothing like this ever happened again. I made sure to hire Peter back on a full-time basis. With a significant raise, we never spoke of the incident again, but I made it a point to always remind my team that their work, though often invisible, was invaluable, and from then on, compliance was never taken for granted. And now let's move on to the title story, which is titled, "I faced 5 armed robbers with my gun and taught them a lesson." And if you have watched until here and enjoy my daily stories, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because I would be forever grateful. Thank you so much for your amazing support. I want to show all of you exactly why the Second Amendment is helpful in America. Although admittedly, I'm actually a responsible gun owner, and that does make a difference because there are some people in this story that are decidedly not that. So either way, I was just happy that I had the ability to act instead of being stuck frozen in fear. So me and my family were supposed to be flying out for vacation on the day that this story happened. We were gonna spend a week down south in Cabo because my son and wife love the beach and the sun, and I would tolerate anything for them. We made the decision to fly there for a host of reasons, not the least of which being a poor experience I had driving to a resort with my own family when I was younger. From what I can tell, flying is certainly abnormal for most families going to these Mexican resorts though. The reason I'm actually telling you this is because of the way that airlines can screw with your plans even at the best of times. There was some weather coming into central Texas that cancelled some flights the evening that we flew out. We were flying out in the morning, which meant we would miss those delays. Except the plane we were on had some technical difficulties and ended up needing a computer replaced. This delayed the flight by nearly 8 hours and the weather was becoming inclement by the time it was available to depart. They cancelled it by this point though. My family rescheduled onto a flight the next day and went home because we lived near the airport. We were tired as you can only be because of the airline shenanigans, but we got ourselves a couple board games in and watched an episode of a show before my wife was taking blinks longer than the commercial breaks. I figured we would get to bed and the next morning get started early so we could go out for breakfast with the extra funds we had from cancelling a night at the resort. I'm sure my son had better ideas, but he stayed in the dark in his room, so he was as asleep as I needed him to be for vacation. I was restless, however. Something about being trapped at the airport all day made laying in bed insufferable once I realized sleep would not come as easy for me as for my wife. I got up and almost checked on my son, but knew I had no real reason to bother him for being awake and I would just annoy him if I tried to talk while he was playing one of his games. So anyway, I made my way downstairs to wander. I expected to eventually grab a book or my laptop and head up to sit in the bedroom, but no specific goals yet. Neither the restlessness nor the aimlessness are common traits for me, to be honest, so I thank God and will gladly thank whatever other deities people might believe in that I was behaving like this on this very night. So it put me in the perfect position to see the 2 cars that pulled into my driveway with no headlights on. I don't have a ton of land, but I do have a long driveway, and there's no reason for anyone to pull all the way up to my house without me knowing ahead of time. My aimlessness was immediately shocked out of my system with the thought that I was not supposed to be home tonight. I rushed upstairs, threw my son's door open, telling him to go, wake up his mother, locked them both in the bathroom and called the police. I'm so proud that he listened without questioning me. Meanwhile, I ran into my upstairs office and went through the gun vault. I got out my handgun and checked the window to see if they had made their way into the house yet. There were 5 of them outside of their cars, but I assumed that they wouldn't have sent someone to the door alone. I trust my gut, so down the stairs I went. I tucked myself behind the bottom of the staircase where it connects to the dining room. There wasn't much in the dining room that I thought they'd be interested in, so I guess they would dismiss it at a glance and I could inspect them before deciding how to act. The idea of 5 people breaking in was making my hands sweat a little bit, but I luckily had practiced at the shooting range in the heat and knew how to keep it steady. I expected them to just break the door open, but I guess they had more finesse than that. They picked the lock and upon entering, they mentioned a police response time. This let me know that they were actually experienced, even if they obviously targeted homes that were vacant at the time. I really didn't want to know how they might react when shocked. I could see that at least 3 of them were packing handguns, and I would assume the other 2 would as well. For all I knew, they were people who started waving their pistols around in a panic though. I needed to control this situation, so I found a way to. They split up with their planned driver investigating the rooms near the door, unlikely to have valuables but keeping him in a well-controlled space. And well, this backfired on them. I waited on the other 4 to go deeper in the house and shot the man through the meat of his thigh. I did not even think I hit bone, so he would not even have a limp after a few weeks. The gunshot and his screams summoned them all. Once they were all gathered, he was able to collect himself enough to point to the dining room, and all 4 of their headlamps turned towards where I had been hiding. The last thing I wanted was for 3 to 5 people with guns to know my actual location, so I moved after letting loose my first shot. It was relatively easy to move around them considering I knew the layout of my house, and instead of turning on house lights, they simply relied on headlamps. This drew a shining target on their backs and let me navigate around them. They pointed their guns at the dining room then. After yelling at me to show myself, one of them shot the wall I was supposedly hiding behind because I guess he watched some John Wick. Meanwhile, I was around in the office on the opposite side of the entryway. Whoever their leader was smacked the gun out of Hotshot's hands and griped at him that gunshots were one of the best ways to quicken police response. The other guy looked insulted and was honestly gonna be more volatile now, but I knew how to disable for the most effective morale destruction. Before the Hotshot could get the gun back in his hand, I made my move. I shot the leader in the thigh as well and slammed the door shut before they could all turn. I locked the door. I'm pretty sure it was Hotshot who decided to rush the door and start knocking at it, which kept the gun out of his hands, hopefully. I yelled, "I have a gun aimed on this door. I would suggest you back away from it." The knocking quieted. "Well, now you're locked in a room and the 5 of us can move freely. What's your plan now?" 3 men, and I don't have to stall you much. The police were on the way when you pulled up in the driveway, so I don't think your precious countdown will help you much. I could hear some mumbling through the door. "You're bluffing." I had enough time to get my gun and lie in wait for you. But you can believe what you will, no skin off my back. I heard groaning and a few yelps of pain that let me know they were probably on their way out the door with their injured companions. I stayed in the dark away from the door and window just to be safe though. That was the right thing to do because Hotshot unloaded more bullets through the door. He spat loudly, "Should have enjoyed Cabo. We'll be back for you soon." They drove off, and I must admit that this statement concerned me because of what it could mean for my wife and son if they actually did get away with this. If they cased the joint well enough to know when I would be on vacation, they probably knew more than just the basic information about my family. When I went to retrieve my family from the locked bathroom, my wife had tears still streaming down her face. I told them to grab their bags. I was prepared to get us to a hotel after speaking with the police. But they were taking forever to show up, and having us all sitting ducks in my entryways made me just as nervous. I was about to get them back up the stairs when a police car, with their lights on but the sirens off, came up the driveway. I went to speak with them and learned that they had a valid reason for the slow response time. As the first responders had gotten to the end of my driveway, the 2 cars went speeding off down the street. They ended up catching them and sending a car back to speak with us. If it weren't enough to catch their hands in the cookie jar, then there were plenty of valuables reported stolen in the apartments they had registered to their names. They were all strangers, but I didn't have to be too concerned about how they got my information, because one of them was apparently an employee at XYZ Airlines and got the information about my trip from that. They were not super knowledgeable about anything other than my name, address, and the fact that I was gonna be out of town, and the airline did do some extra sweeps in response to his arrest, but it seems like that the leader was on his own in infiltrating the airline staff. All 5 of them went to prison, and Hotshot showed that he was all bark and no bite when he broke down in tears at the court hearing. Still, if I had not had my gun, I might have had to watch these men clear out my house and potentially hold my family hostage if the cops showed up at the right time. Overall, I'm proud of how I reacted to the situation and of the fact that I kept myself out of the line of fire as much as possible, and I'm proud of the court system for putting those men in prison for threatening how safe my family feels in their home. And the next one is titled Quiet Malicious Compliance. So ever since I was little, I was quiet. This was mainly due to having terrible older siblings, and I learned to walk silently. I've tried to make myself plop my feet so as not to scare people, but I've been known to walk extremely silently. Please note, I'm 300 pounds plus 5'10" person with a huge beer belly, so I could not even hide even if I wanted to, since I usually wear black and a red vest. Since I'm so silent, I've become loud, very vocal, so as not to scare people and let people know I'm in the area. I talk to myself, sing songs, talk to everyone passing by, etc. I do my best to be friendly, even though I'm socially drained every day and rather stay inside for that month. Regardless, I'm a very loud person. A regular customer apparently did not like it since I was so loud and asked me to be quiet. I apologized and toned everything down, but my supervisor also complained. I was asked to become less loud. Okay, since then I've scared a lot of people ranging from customers to the very own supervisor. I usually greet people 5 to 10 feet away from them so as to not get too close. Most of them I've even made eye contact with and I still scare them. Essentially giving jump scares to everyone, and people complained that I was not in my department. Almost everyone I've joked with by stating I need a bell. So now the fallout. Last week I decided 1 week of torture was good enough. It was time to go ahead and stop being a gremlin. As much as I enjoy scaring people that are taller than me, I was probably creating an unsafe work environment, so I decided to make 3 rules to make things better. No big blowout, no real problems, just making an adult decision. Number 1, try to greet everyone from the end of the aisle so as to avoid scaring them too much. Number 2, if I somehow sneak up on them, take several steps back so as to give them even more space. Number 3, tell your coworkers you're going behind them at any point in time. I followed each one to the ladder and have gotten less jump scares from customers. The fellow supervisors and coworkers are another story. I've actually gotten more jump scares from them than when I was silent. For example, I came around a corner and I stopped to see a supervisor helping a cashier. I said I was coming behind them and they both jumped. The supervisor even screamed a little. Responding to some comments from the last post that I could remember, I do not come close to someone I know that was in the armed services or police force. I make sure they know where I am at all times, because you don't own PTSD. PTSD owns you, meaning something could set you off, and well, I do not want that because of me. I respect them too much for that. Unfortunately though, no one else had joined me in on trying to scare the supervisors. I told maybe 1 or 2 people about it, but they just put it off as workplace antics. I wish to thank everyone that posted a comment stating that they also scare people. I got a huge kick from those comments and I hope you occasionally scare people when it's safe to do so. I certainly plan to restart being a gremlin when Halloween hits. The next one is titled, I Got Him Fired. Hey Reddit, today I wanna tell you my story. This happened a long time ago. I used to work at a hospital data center in the network operations group. This was one of those jobs I would not recommend to anybody. Honestly, just don't ever apply for a job like this. We physically sat in a room 24/7 next to the servers to make sure things did not catch on fire, monitored for alerts and did routine things like swap out tape backups, but it was pretty simple work. This was ostensibly a tech job, but there were people who had been there for many years back when you had to change out printer paper and run a command from an IBM mainframe. It was really on specialized hardware and software that was difficult to apply elsewhere, so it had become a dead-end job. And because there were people who were not tech savvy at all really, we were not given much responsibility. You cannot tell some people they can log into a server and others not, so we were reduced to the lowest common denominator. We were a network operations center where nobody was allowed to interact with any network equipment. Lowest common denominator, you say? Meet my new supervisor. Karen, not her real name but definitely her real spirit, had been there for over 20 years and got the job solely based on seniority. She was a sociopathic narcissist and one of the most unpleasant people I've ever encountered. Shortly after I was hired, we were bought by another hospital and combined data centers. Karen was demoted to shift lead and had to work with us in a 24/7 rotation. She was very bad at her job and our responsibilities diminished to very little. We had no agency to fix any problems of our own because it had to be a problem that Karen could solve, and Karen was both lazy and stupid. After a couple of years, I was promoted. On my first day after they announced the promotion, she said, "You will fail," just straight to my face. But she had a powerful tool at her disposal: the hospital bureaucracy. Since the place was unionized, the hospital had a just cause firing policy instead of an at-will policy, even for non-unionized employees. This is, I think, generally a good thing, but on the edges it set up ridiculous situations where it was impossible to lose your job unless you were really egregious about it with repeated violations or you showed up drunk and high. We had someone steal computer equipment and they kept their job. It was nuts, and Karen had been there for nearly 30 years, so she was not getting fired without a lot of work. Anyway, that's okay, she was terrible at her job. One of the most important things about the job was monitoring for an alert which would pop up, and there was a procedure that we had to go through in order for some data to go through. If we did not do this, then a nurse would not get their lab results back. So, in one case, an alert came in, Karen saw it and then decided to keep browsing the web. Because of this, a patient from the cardiac ICU was going into surgery and the doctors and nurses operating on the patient could not get a white blood cell count. I'm not a doctor, I just work in a building with lots of them, something very dangerous anyway for this patient, and the patient died. This still did not get Karen fired. The reasoning from HR, well, it did not directly lead to harm. And she did not even feel bad about it, just a complete soulless sociopath. I'm real pro-worker in general, but some jobs you just absolutely have to. I was so mad she had to go. I kept a paper trail of everything she messed up on. It was not nitpicky, literal life and death stuff here. Verbal warning, first written warning, second written warning, final written warning, termination. A slog, and I would rather spend my time doing anything else, but that's the way it went. Then she figured out she could work the system. As she approached work Armageddon, termination, she would tell HR that she was being harassed. The person harassing her was different every time, which would trigger a mandatory investigation. This investigation took about 6 months, they would not find anything and we would carry on. Except these warnings, they had a 6-month expiration, so she could always reset the clock when it got close. Everyone was helpless. Even the CIO could not do anything about it because of the bureaucracy. Karen was a menace and the entire IT department had to interact with the data center staff, and that meant interacting with her, and she was universally disliked. And she had 20 years until retirement and she would outlast the heat death of the universe. Then I had an idea. What if, under the guise of developing skills relevant to the 21st century, required everyone working in the Network Operations Center to pass the Net Plus exam? It's not a difficult exam, but it's not trivially easy. I felt pretty sure that everyone on the team felt above the line between able to pass and not able to pass, except Karen. We would give everyone better titles, a significant pay raise, and entrusted to do more with the equipment, which is something everyone desperately wanted. Then people could actually leave the hospital with transferable skills and do something else if they wanted to and not feel trapped. I spent 3 years in meetings with HR, with my director, with the CIO, with HR again, job description meetings that took 6 hours to tweak small wording. Hundreds of hours in meetings, red tape hell. Absolute red tape hell. Do you have any idea what it takes to approve a significant raise in a bureaucratic muck factory like that? But the raises were crucial because it would absolutely not be fair to ask this of them. Pass a test or lose your job. Without a large carrot attached would lead to mutiny. And then it got approved. I also wrote the exam requirement into my own job description. It was important to still be able to do the job and not let my skills lapse just because I was promoted. And also, this meant I could cover for people when they were on vacation or sick. Plus, I also got that sweet pay bump. It went over well. I was nervous, but the plan made sense and I was able to communicate that people would be more marketable. The job would be more interesting, and most importantly, they would be making 20% more than they were before, and I think it really helped that I also gave myself the same requirement when I absolutely could have chosen not to. The hospital would pay for off-site training, they would still get paid their full hourly during the training, including shift differential for second and third shifts. We paid for all the materials. I scheduled 8 hours a week for people to go someplace quiet and study. The job itself had a ton of downtime so people could study, but this was formally carved out time anyway. We paid for the exam, and if they failed we would pay for the second attempt. We were given 8 months to pass the test, so this is how it was for the 8 months. I did not want Karen to have any excuse whatsoever and somehow convince HR that this process was rushed or unfair. Everyone passed on the first attempt except Karen. Karen did not pass her second or third attempt, a bonus attempt. Karen, being the classic narcissist, thought this was somehow all about her, that this was a vast conspiracy engineered over multiple years and hundreds of hours just to get rid of her. And she would tell everyone within earshot that that is what is going on. Yeah, okay Karen, you realize how insane that sounds, right? Not everything is about you. Sheesh. Well, okay, in this case it is, but still. Only I and the 2 other people know that. I remember the exact time and date we told her. She was in such deep denial that it could ever happen, she thought she was bulletproof. I don't think I will ever achieve anything more satisfying in my career. I'm not usually one to take satisfaction in seeing someone's livelihood go, but she was uniquely awful. She was a patient danger, and it had been nearly a decade of working with her by this point, and I was just so sick and tired of her BS. I was a hero the day after she was fired. I went to the main office for a meeting and people were congratulating me like I had just had a kid or won a marathon or something. Even the CIO. They were just happy for me that I did not have to supervise Karen anymore. But in my head canon, they were congratulating me for pulling off this elaborate plan. Morale back at the data center was also high. We learned interesting things. A couple of my coworkers left for better gigs elsewhere. The ones who were content staying were able to stay, and we all had more money and job security. And because anything could set off a BS Karen harassment complaint, people were stressed out working with her. Her being gone was like a breath of fresh air. Newcomers were told stories of Karen and they seemed exaggerated, but they were not. In order to solve a very important and extremely difficult problem, I pulled off a vast workplace conspiracy that improved the lives of the people I worked with in addition to keeping our patients safe. Getting Karen fired is my greatest and most difficult accomplishment, and I cannot put it on a CV anywhere. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. And also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much, and I will see you again tomorrow.